Mr. President, I'd like to address a separate issue, separate in the congressional record. On January 6, 2021, a solemn constitutional proceeding was disrupted when a mob of thugs, egged on by President Trump, attacked and trashed the U.S. Capitol in an attempt to overturn the results of a presidential election. The grim result of that insurrection was the subsequent death of 5 law enforcement officers and injuries to approximately 140 others, many of whom are still paying the price to this day. It came as a shock when on the first day of Donald Trump's presidency, he issued a blanket pardon for those who had been convicted for that January 6th attack on the Capitol. We all saw the videos, we all saw the photographs. Here's an illustration of one of them. Listen to what President Trump said about 1,600 pardons at a recent press conference when he was asked, why did you pardon all those people who attacked the police officers in the Capitol building? He said, quote, I pardoned people who were assaulted themselves. They were assaulted by our government. They didn't assault. They were assaulted. What I did was a great thing for humanity. The American people overwhelmingly disagree with the president, and they disagree with his decision. 83% of them oppose the pardons that he gave. That includes 70% who lean Republican in their voting. Despite this overwhelming opposition, the Justice Department has now broadened the scope of President Trump's pardons for January 6 rioters to include separate charges stemming from searches conducted during those investigations. I'll describe a couple of them to you. Federal prosecutors recently dropped explosives and firearm crimes being pursued against 2 January 6 defendants pardoned by President Trump, Daniel Ball and Elias Kostians. Ball and Kostians had both been charged in separate proceedings with illegally possessing weapons that law enforcement discovered during the January 6 related search. Ball had been accused of throwing, quote, an explosive device that detonated upon at least 25 officers during the Capitol riot and of forcefully shoving police who were trying to protect the Capitol. Ball was barred from possessing firearms because of his prior criminal record. Listen to this prior criminal record of a man who was pardoned by Donald Trump. Before January 6, Ball was convicted of domestic violence battery by strangulation, resisting law enforcement with violence, and battery on law enforcement officer. And President Trump says that poor man was assaulted by the police. Does it sound like it? Remember, President Trump told us Ball and his fellow rioters were the actual victims. No wonder so many of the January 6 perpetrators have shown a stunning lack of remorse. Just last Friday, just a few days ago, a number of these pardoned individuals decided to hold their own press conference outside the U.S. Capitol to announce their intent to sue the Justice Department for prosecuting them for this. Dangerous individuals, including former Proud Boy leader Enrique Tarrio, who'd been serving a 22-year sentence for seditious conspiracy before the Trump pardon. Proud Boy Ethan Nardine, who'd been serving an 18-year sentence. Dominic Pizzola, the first rioter to breach the building on January 6. He was serving a 10-year sentence for stealing a police riot shield and using it to break a window. I'll bet you saw that video. I did. The group paraded through the Capitol after their press conference, following the same route they took on January 6, 2021. They posed for photos, chanting as they did that day, quote, whose house? Our house. And after the press conference, Mr. Tarrio was even arrested again outside the Capitol for assaulting a female counter-protester. Tarrio also posted a video of himself stalking Michael Fanone and Harry Dunn, former police officers who had defended the Capitol on January 6. Tarrio was following them through the lobby of a hotel where the officers were attending a conference. While Tarrio followed them, he was calling out at them that they were cowards and telling them to keep walking. Does this sound like a man ashamed of his actions on January 6 and full of remorse? Does this sound like an innocent victim of assault? No, this sounds like a man who now thinks he is above the law with his Trump pardon and expects to be bailed out by President Trump for every crime he decides to commit. In another horrifying term, the same hotel that I discussed earlier where these rioters were stalking policemen had to be evacuated after someone claiming to be MAGA emailed a threat about 4 bombs, 2 in the hotel and 1 at Officer Fanone's mother's mailbox. After listing the names of several of the conference attendees and singling out Officer Fanone, the email said they, quote, all deserve to die. These are men and women in police forces who risked their lives for members of the Senate and the House of Representatives on January 6th. The perpetrator of this source of this tweet claimed to be acting, quote, to honor the January 6th hostages recently released by Emperor Trump, his words. And these are just last week's updates on the January 6 rioters President Trump pardoned. The list of crimes committed by these thugs just keeps growing longer and longer. We must be clear that these individuals are a threat, and the more power and freedom they're given, the more danger they pose to our democracy, and the law enforcement officers and families of those officers that they are harassing. Just this month, dozens of January 6th offenders joined forces on social media to compile and publicize the identities of at least 124 individuals who had been involved in their convictions, including prosecutors, judges, and FBI agents. The post, which has received 60,000 views, included names, photos, disparaging remarks, and demands for accountability. In January, another pardoned January 6th defendant who pleaded guilty to assaulting police officers, Ryan Nichols Sr., identified in a Twitter post, quote, officers in the D.C. jail who need to be investigated for corruption and abuse, end of quote, adding the names and LinkedIn profile photos of 2 D.C. jail employees. This is stalking and harassment of law enforcement, men and women who were assigned to this Capitol to protect us. The men and women who bravely defended the members of this body deserve better than this, and we should honor them for their heroic efforts on that day, not excuse the rioters who attacked this chamber and the ideals it represents. Government employees should not fear for their safety or that of their families for simply doing their job. I hope that all of us, regardless of our political persuasion, will finally agree on one thing. Violence has no place in a democracy, and Donald Trump's pardon of these 1,600 January 6 attackers is not only an insult to the Capitol Police, who risked their lives to stop them, but has emboldened these convicts to harass these officers and their families. Mr. President, the question for the Senate is simple. Whose side are you on, the police or the rioters? I yield the floor.